Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hello everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of Now That's Significant, a Market Research Podcast. I am your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at Infotools. Today, we are joined by Emmanuel Probst, the Global Lead Brand Thought Leadership at Ipsos. He is an adjunct professor at the University of California. Emmanuel has written 2 books, the latest of which we're going to be talking about today, Assemblage, the Art and Science of Brand Transformation. Thanks for joining us on the show, Emmanuel.
Michael, thank you so much for having me on the show and for giving me the opportunity to connect with your community today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. So, Emmanuel, I guess we've had a bit of a sneak peek of what we're covering, and we can see a little bit of some product placement behind you there as well. For those of you who are listening, he has some books of his on the shelf behind him. So what is the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for us in the market research community, and frankly, maybe for the world at large, is to say brands can no longer force feed us with products we don't need. We have too many brands and too many products to choose from. Beyond just selling products, which is still very relevant, brands must also transform us as individuals and the world we live in. And what I mean by this is brands cannot just sell products, they must also make a positive impact on us as individuals, on the world around us and the world at large. I think that's important and urgent.
No, very true. And we've seen some really good examples of that as well. So I really like what Rory Sutherland, the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy UK, had to say about your book, Assemblage, the Art and Science of Brand Transformation. He started with an initial quote from Jeremy Bullmore: "People build brands the way birds build nests, from the scraps and straws they find lying around." So Sutherland said, using the model of assemblage, the art of blending fine cognacs, a nice little image there, you have provided us with a much more helpful and versatile mental model for the way brands should be built in practice. So is what Sutherland said there a fair representation of what compelled you to write this book?
Yeah, David Ogilvy, before Rory Sutherland is a great industry leader and is an inspiration for me. David Ogilvy, before Rory Sutherland, obviously, had this thinking also that most junior people, as well as senior marketers, but also junior individuals, could bring some good ideas. And so assemblage is a metaphor of, as you suggested, of how do we create a whiskey or how do we create a cognac? Well, we do so by picking and choosing different brandies and creating, in that regard, a unique blend. So that's what an assemblage is. In the world of branding, this applies, that's the metaphor here, whereby to create brands that are meaningful to people and that people will be loyal to, we want to pick and choose from culture, from the social environment, what is going to make the brand, again, relevant and meaningful. So as such, those 2 guys were important inspirations to this book.
Cool. So thinking about the new era of brand relevance that we're in, it would be remiss of us not to touch on brand purpose, like one of the buzzwords in the marketing community at the moment. What's your take on it, and what's a market researcher's role in all of that?
Yeah, brand purpose has been a buzzword for what, 5, 7, 10 years now. And I think initially too many brands jumped on that buzzword, claiming a purpose just because they had to. Now, the way purpose evolved, in my experience, over the last 5 years, and I would say really over the last 3 years, 2-3 years since COVID, is brands can no longer just claim a purpose, they have to demonstrate this purpose. So it's really important to demonstrate what you're able to do, how you're able to impact the world. And also it is important because if you don't, well, people will cancel you. Consumers may cancel your brands, or if anything, they might talk very negatively about your brand. So in this book, Assemblage, The Art and Science of Transformation, there is a lot about this process of co-creation of the brand between the marketer, the brand manager, and the audience. So purpose is one, you have to be able to demonstrate your purpose. Two, it has to be on brand and very relevant. The story has to add up, for lack of a better expression. And three, it's an ongoing interaction and co-creation process with the audience.
So essentially, it's a show me, don't tell me.
Precisely. You got it. It's exactly this. But you know, Michael, I'm thinking here, I'm thinking out loud with you. You have some brands that are built around purpose. And maybe let's think of National Geographic. National Geographic is a brand that is built on purpose, that is to make planet Earth look its best, okay? And then you have brands that were not built on purpose, but can adopt a purpose. And if Volvo is in the business of making cars, but is telling us that the key priority is safety and the environment, you know, that makes sense. So that's how you can pivot and adopt a purpose that really makes sense. And then you have some brands, and I'm not going to point fingers because I don't like to say bad things about people, but you have some brands that for which purpose is just not relevant, and they should stay away from it altogether. Not everyone has to be on a mission to save the world. I don't think so. So just important to be humble about it, I think, as brand strategists, as brand managers, as marketers, as researchers, and always very, very important to always listen, proactively listen to people. And I'm talking about people, not consumers, okay? Listen to people, listen to the audience, and engage in this process of co-creation with your audience.
What are some of the ways, this might be going back to basics, that that brands can listen to their people then?
Yeah, and I think it's not going back to basics in a good way. We have so many tools now to listen to what people are saying. So what this means is, of course, we can do surveys. Of course, we can do qualitative research, such as focus groups and ethnographies and things like this. And all these are very relevant, very, very valuable. There's so much more we can do. We can also rely on social media listening. We also at Ipsos integrate, we monitor news activity. You can also leverage or pay attention to academic publications and legislative publications. And of course, what's going on social media, right? Not just social media listening, but anything that has to do with trends and that type of activity. So to me, the holy grail, if I may use this expression, is the ability to collect disparate types of data and combine those disparate sources of data into something that is coherent and is going to drive a decision.
And I guess you could think about that if from an artwork or painting perspective, like one source of data is like looking up right close to your artwork, but then when you step back, you get to see it all. Both you can see some really interesting things, but they have different purposes.
Yes, and in line with what you just suggested, Michael, I have the humility to say that all data sets have shortcomings. You know, we can talk about statistical significance the whole day and quality control in the data. All this is great, but the truth is, all those data sets considered in isolation, they all have shortcomings. And to me, the skill here, the opportunity, I should say, it's not to try to fix data quality in isolation. I mean, you can, but that's a very tall order. It is to be aware of limitations from these different data sets, and again, combine those various data sets so that they compensate for their shortcomings.
That's right. So one point that comes out strongly in your book, which is related to the disconnect we're seeing between brand purpose and how brands actually operate. And that's how sick consumers are of today's marketing and advertising. So how have we got to this point, and what can brands do to address it?
Yeah, we got to this point because, especially in North America, I live in the United States, and if you want to buy popcorn, you go to the store and you have literally 150 options. And if you want to buy toothpaste, you have at least 80 options, and so on and so forth. So we got to this point because over time, marketers believe that there is always a market for a new product, for a new flavor, for a new packaging. Really, at the end of the day, this becomes confusing and frankly overwhelming for consumers. And the benefit is not always clear. And as such, people keep returning to the exact same brands and the exact same products. We see this in numerous studies. When you study shopping trips, shopping missions at the grocery store, you will see that people tend to buy always the same 120 to 140 items, same items no matter what, even though you have 30,000 SKUs in the store, because we are creatures of habits, if you will. So how did we get to that point? Because as a society, we believed that the opportunity for products and brands was unlimited. How can we recover from that? By building meaningful brands, meaningful products, by considering brands that are dynamic in nature. Brands are no longer static. And I'm coming back to this process of co-creating the brand with the audience. The benefit of doing so is to create brands that feel more relevant, more personal, more engaging, more culturally relevant, and that's very important. And this opportunity to evolve the brand with the audience so that you foster loyalty this way and not just around whatever new flavor of popcorn.
Yes. So in your book, you look at the big brands we all know, think Dove and Airbnb, but you also look at some of the much smaller brands like Farrell and Ball. Why is that?
Yeah, Michael and our listeners, we attend conferences and we listen to great podcasts and we read Ad Age and marketing and market research publications. All this is great. A shortcoming, in my opinion, is we always end up talking about Nike, about Airbnb, about what Google does and Apple does. And listen, don't get me wrong here. Those are leading brands, leading examples, and by all means, they're inventing categories even. So I like studying those big brands. That said, the limitation is the vast majority of marketers don't have $120 million to advertise their brand this year. So that's the shortcoming, in my opinion, when you look at those big brands. As such, I think it's very interesting to look at much smaller brands that don't have the budget and the clout and the share of voice, yet manage to do something so different, so unique, that they stand out in a good way. And I like my goal, if you will, in my writing is to inspire the community and to inspire everyone, and to always keep in mind that only 7% of us work for a Fortune 500. 93% of us work for a brand that is smaller than a Fortune 500, which suggests that 99.5% of us don't work for Airbnb or Google or Apple or Nike.
Yeah, so we may be consumers of, but not working for. So
yeah.
So now we've set the scene for this new era. Let's turn our attention back to assemblage, the title of your book. What is assemblage, and why is it important to market researchers all of a sudden?
Yeah, so assemblage or assemblage is the art and science of transformation. And as we briefly suggested, it's a metaphor. That's how you make a whiskey or cognac. You pick and choose from different brandies to create a product that's unique and distinctive. And you can build, or I suggest you should build, a brand exactly the same way by considering attributes, by picking elements from culture and from basically the world around you, so that these brands, one, can evolve as they should, as brands are no longer static but constantly evolving, and two, a good brand must do three things besides product, right? A good brand must benefit me, my personal identity project, must benefit my friends and family, so the world around me, and must also make a positive impact on society, on the economy. So that's what the book is about. And the reason why this is important is because we see time and again that people expect more from brands. Not only brands must deliver on the product itself or the service, but the expectation is also for the brand to help with economic recovery, to participate to a more sustainable world, to support education, and so on and so forth. Brands must do the right thing for the world we live in.
Yeah, and it can be pretty tricky for brands as well to know which voice, which culture, which I guess elements of society that they should be looking to in terms of their transformation as well.
Indeed, and it's also important to keep in mind that it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and that is also a shortcoming of the early attempts in brand purpose. Is not everyone is on a mission to save the world. That's fine. I can give you a few examples. You can be a technology brand. You can be Microsoft and Google as examples, and you're on a mission to educate people in how to use digital tools. Now, of course, your products, but importantly, think about it this way. If you're a small business and you're an artisan type of business, or it's all about craftsmanship, well, you are not an expert in digital advertising, and you're not an expert in safeguarding your data in the cloud, for example. And that's how large technology brands can step in and educate people, help people basically running their businesses and growing their own career by providing the educational resources they need. So that's an example as applied to technology. There are many, many other examples. You can be in finance and educate people about how to save money and how to manage money. And you can be in healthcare and also educate people about the risks of certain viruses, or most importantly, how to preventatively not to get sick, right? And so on and so forth. So there are so many opportunities for brands to contribute, to do the right thing. And listen, indirectly, it benefits their brand, their product, their sales, and that's fine. Let's make no mistake. We're here to make money. We're for-profit business. I'm simply saying that's not the only thing, or if anything, that's not the only way we want to make money. We want to be more responsible, and we want to be more strategic as well. Not just sell products tomorrow, but sell products that will last in the long run.
That's right. And I guess that's one interesting reason or facet of you and your background, having both academic and commercial too. So you can bring different perspectives to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. If I may, on that note, see, those two worlds historically, they don't communicate very well. And what I mean by this is, if you read academic papers, you see excellent research, excellent ideas. Hardly ever do you see those ideas scaled properly. I mean, maybe you do in artificial intelligence and things that are very scientific, but in marketing, it doesn't translate very well most of the time. Conversely, when we talk with practitioners, we hear of good ideas. However, they often lack the depth, the foundation, because, for example, my book is written in consumer psychology. That's what my doctoral research was all about. And this perspective of the psychology of a consumer is absolutely crucial to building great brands. And so one of my, in fact, to use your word, my purpose, if you will, is to bring together the best of academia and the best of the practitioners' world, the brands, and connect these two, bring the best of both worlds, and leverage those great learnings so that both academics and brand practitioners can be more inspired and build better brands.
So in the book, you also talk about anti-heroes, saviors, and villains. How did they relate to building brand relevance in the world today?
Yeah, so those are what we like to call archetypes, and archetypes are heroes, anti-heroes, saviors, and villains. And very often in advertising, you will see a hero, and a hero is someone who has superpowers. And if you think of Superman and Batman, and those are great, they are not necessarily very relatable simply because most of us cannot fly, okay? Or jump from one building to another.
Yes.
And in all seriousness, what's compelling about anti-heroes, villains, and saviors is they're relatable. An anti-hero is someone who is going to be able to behave in a heroic fashion, yet has flaws and is struggling with herself or with himself. And as such, an anti-hero, so think of Tony Soprano, for example, or think of Don Draper in Mad Men. And anti-heroes are relatable because they're a little bit like us. They're only trying to improve. They're not perfect. They can do very, very well at something, and they can really struggle with something else. And villains also are very relatable because, in a way, you want to side with the villain. You know that the villain is struggling and that he doesn't have any friends, and villain is by nature, villain is flawed. So those archetypes, now the archetype of the hero, you see this left, right, and center in advertising, that's fine. But those archetypes of anti-heroes, villains, and saviors are very relatable, in my opinion, more relatable now, as, again, we're envisioning a more personal, genuine, authentic connection with the brand. And we're no longer obsessed with perfection. The brand doesn't have to be perfect. The brand has to be real and authentic. And the last point is, let's always remember that the hero is the individual. The hero is the consumer, not the brand. Nobody cares about the brand, or I should say, most people don't care about most brands. The brand is here to facilitate this transformation that we spoke about from who am I to who do I want to become. That's what I meant earlier when we spoke about our identity project.
Just interesting on the anti-heroes, saviors, and villains. We have actually seen the rise of anti-villains as well in the movie place. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of shows up in archetypes as well.
Indeed.
Yeah. One other thing that's quite relevant at the moment, and you've talked about authenticity. So one thing that brands are going to have to deal with and are wrestling with at the moment is the whole AI and chat GPT, etc. So you've got a lot of stuff out there that can be processed by computers, but it's not necessarily authentic or written by a human. Have you had any thoughts or discussions on that point?
Thank you for bringing this up, Michael. I downloaded Chat GPT 3 days ago, and I'm very compelled with the capabilities of the bot. And to your point, I'm really thinking about what does this mean? And when I say what does this mean, is not just like how threatening it is, but what does this mean for creating knowledge? How is that going to impact the way we create ideas and new knowledge? So where my mind is at now, and this will likely evolve over the next few months and years, I see this as a fantastic excellent tool to collect, combine, digest information. I don't think, however, that it's a tool that is creative. That, to me, is the limitation in a good way. That's the limitation of artificial intelligence. And what I mean by this is you can dictate what you need from the bot or from the algorithm. And as such, you can save a lot of time, for sure. If you need to compile a 2-page summary on what is Harry Potter about and what are Nike's strengths and weaknesses, well, that's fantastic. ChatGPT can do this for you. Not very accurately yet, and it's not perfect, but it's still very, very compelling. So that's great. Basically, that's glorified desk research, if I want to be a little bit cynical about it. And what the bot doesn't do, and again, that's great, that's good news for us, is let's be creative and let's understand people and emotions. And I think that's where, as professionals, as individuals, that's where we're going to add value in the next few years. It's no longer about our capabilities, our abilities to conduct desk research that's buttoned up, because the bot can do this with us, for us, I should say, in a matter of seconds. It's going to be about understanding culture, understanding people, and being empathetic with people, capturing those emotions, relating to people, connecting with people, and building great brands based on all this.
That's right. So you also mentioned how consumers are feeling lonelier than ever. Why do you think this is, and what can market researchers do to help the organization and consumers overcome that loneliness?
Yeah, there was that punchline in my first book. It was, the more connected we are, the lonelier we feel. And that's because our research shows that no matter how many devices and apps and social media platforms, the fact is, very sadly, that it's harder and harder to make friends. And we see, I won't get into details about the numbers, but we see in surveys that millennials, for example, have very few friends, and younger generations, that's how you can have 3,000 followers on Instagram, yet you don't have even one friend in real life, meaning someone you could call at 3 a.m. if something happens to you. So the downside of social media and devices in general is, counterintuitively, people no longer know how to communicate with people. You can text, you can chat online, and you can post memes, and of course you can ask ChatGPT to create a picture of a Great Dane for you, painted by Picasso. Okay, that's funny, but this is not meaningful. This is not a sense of connection to a community, to a group, or to a specific individual. And your question is, what brands, what can we do in market research? And I think it's going to be very, very important. We're doing a lot of work on this at Ipsos, to measure, to consider empathy, and also to consider the context in which people live, and also to consider their expectations towards the product, towards the brand, but also their expectations towards the world and society.
That's right. So, I mean, you've also got the whole aspect, people have forgotten how to disagree and move on with people. So in the social media context, if someone says something, you can just move on, close the window, close the message, and not think about it. But when you were together and you're disagreeing, you still had to navigate it. And you could often, it was easier in one sense to put that disagreement aside and then continue that relationship.
I couldn't agree more, Michael. It's becoming harder and harder for people to say no. And on a personal note, if you will, it turns out that last night I hosted a event in Los Angeles for my book launch. And we had about 70, 80 people there. And that's all to say that, of course, we had some cancellations, and that always happens. Now, some of those cancellations came through really last minute. And when I say last minute, is even though this event had been planned 6 weeks ago, we had people canceling on less than an hour notice. And I think, and that's fine. Look, that's expected, and things happen in life. However, what was most striking to me, if you will, is to see the terminology, the language, the angles people will come up to cancel at the very last minute. And you can tell that these people had tremendous anxieties about saying no and about canceling. It's a lot less straightforward than it used to be, if you will.
That's right. So lastly, something I like asking, what implications are there if brands continue to be built like birds building a nest? What will they miss out on? How will they be placed to compete in these modern times?
To compete in these modern times, brands have to understand that they're dynamic, that you can build a brand like a bird's nest. You're constantly building, and you're constantly adding to the nest and refreshing the nest, if you will, because there will be some bad weather maybe for you, or there will be part of the nest is going to age out, and so on and so forth. So to win, you have to understand that you're constantly refreshing, updating, rebuilding your brand so that it stays relevant. And again, you keep in mind that you're no longer in control. You, as a brand manager, are going to co-create the brand with your audience. And I think those are the key learning outcomes from the book. And this book shows you how.
Yeah, cool. So if I can recap what we've talked about today, Emmanuel, how brands need to transform in order to stay relevant and thrive. You gave us some insight into what compelled you to write the book, so thank you for sharing that. We had a good look at brand purpose as well, what market researchers can do to help in this regard. We discussed what's led consumers to switching off to most of the marketing and advertising of today, with some ideas on how to rectify that. You shared some interesting reasons behind why you looked at both large and smaller brands to highlight what each can learn from each other, which was very insightful. You gave us some good knowledge into what assemblage is and why it's so important for market research teams. We talked about anti-heroes, saviors, and villains in regards to archetypes and how that's relevant to building brands. The mood shifted a little lower as we reflected on what brands can do to help consumers who have never felt more lonely. We also looked at a little bit in something that's going to impact brand transformation, etc., AI, and how that is going to play out and what brands need to be mindful of there, understanding its limitations, etc. And lastly, we looked at what happens if brands keep building birds like nests and the need for that so they can thrive in this world. So I think that covers it, right, Emmanuel? Any final points you'd like?
I mean, yeah, thank you, Michael. Very, very good summary. I think you got it all here.
Nice. Any final points you wanted to make?
No, I want to thank you again, Michael, for reaching out and for this opportunity to connect with you and our listeners today. And it's always with a lot of enthusiasm that I come to such conversation. And of course, people can connect with me and ask any additional questions they may want to ask. I'm on LinkedIn at Emmanuel Probst. And of course, the book Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation is available on Amazon.
Very nice. So thank you so much for joining us on the show, Emmanuel.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for listening in today.
You're welcome. And so as Emmanuel said, if you would like to check out Assemblage, you can view it on Amazon right now. We'd really appreciate you leaving a review on your podcast platform if you enjoyed the show today. Also, feel free to send it to a colleague or peer as well. So thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.